I paid for an old man's groceries when his card was declined. Then he handed me a number that changed my life forever. Nothing could prepare me. A cold breeze cut through the air as I pushed the squeaky cart down the supermarket aisle, every turn of the wheels echoing the emptiness of my wallet. The smell of fresh bread and newly brewed coffee, which once brought me comfort, now seemed to mock my situation. There I was, surrounded by abundance, with a shopping list that barely filled the bottom of the basket, and a knot in my throat tightening with every step. The humiliation was a heavy burden, a constant shadow that followed me, especially after the last incident that had pushed me to the edge. That's when I saw him, an elderly man, his hands trembling, trying to swipe his card at the checkout. He looked like he was having a panic attack. The line behind him grew, and the sharp beep of the declined transaction cut through the air like a knife. His face, worn by time and life, twisted into an expression of despair and shame. That scene, so painfully familiar to me, lit a spark of empathy in my chest, a flicker of humanity in the middle of my own misery. I knew exactly what he was feeling, the sting of helplessness, the weight of being a burden. Without thinking twice, I stepped forward, feeling the curious, judgmental eyes on me. My own bank account was deep in the red, and the idea of spending the little I had was insane. But something inside me pushed me to do it. That seemingly small act of paying for a stranger's groceries would become the catalyst for an unimaginable twist in my life. A turning point in a journey I never could have predicted. That moment, so public and humiliating for the old man and for me, would mark the beginning of a shocking transformation. Before we go on, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a free way to support my work. The cashier seemed frozen in time as I finished the payment. The old man took the bags carefully, his fingers still trembling, and looked at me with a gratitude too big for words. Before leaving, he walked up and discreetly slipped a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. "Call me when you can," he murmured, his tone a mix of gratitude and urgency. I stood there feeling the paper damp with sweat between my fingers, not sure what it meant. My life was already a pile of overdue bills, sleepless nights, and makeshift meals for the kids. I had no room for mysteries, but I also had nothing to lose. At home, I dropped the groceries in the kitchen and stared at the note. Just a phone number, no name, no explanation. I thought of the last few weeks. The overdue rent, the car on the verge of being repossessed, the pitying look from my neighbor when she saw me leaving with the kids to sell some furniture. Each memory seemed to push my dignity further down. Part of me thought it would just be an awkward conversation with a stranger. But every time my kids asked for something simple, like a tub of ice cream, and I had to say no, that note in my pocket seemed to get heavier. One rainy night, I sat at the table, the dim kitchen light reflecting on the raindrops running down the window. I picked up the phone and dialed the number with cold hands. On the third ring, I heard his voice, calm, steady, almost paternal. "I thought you weren't going to call." Without meaning to, I told him more than I'd planned. That I was out of work, that I'd lost everything I'd built, that I was doing my best to keep my kids from feeling like we were sinking. He listened in silence, as if each word was a puzzle piece fitting into something he already pictured. At the end of the call, he simply said, "Tomorrow, come to the address I'll send you. This isn't charity, it's an opportunity, but you're going to have to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." That night, for the first time in a long while, I went to sleep with a small spark of hope and a huge fear of what I'd find the next day. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. It wasn't the alarm that pulled me out of bed, but that restless mix of anxiety and curiosity. I looked at my kids still asleep and silently promised myself that if this was the chance I'd been waiting for, I wouldn't waste it. I put on the nicest clothes I had, a slightly faded blouse and worn jeans, and headed to the address he'd sent me. It wasn't at all what I expected. A small corner cafe with an old-fashioned storefront and the smell of warm bread drifting out the door. Inside, he was sitting by the window drinking black coffee and reading a folded newspaper. When he saw me, he smiled like we'd known each other for years. "Have a seat, Joanne," he said, using my name for the first time. We talked for almost an hour. He introduced himself as Arthur, said he'd seen a lot of people hit rock bottom and start over, and that he didn't believe in luck. He believed in preparation. He told me he'd help me, but it would take courage to do things I might never have done before. "Are you ready to really work?" he asked, looking me straight in the eyes in a way that left no room for lies. I was. Or at least I thought I was. He handed me a folder with a few papers inside, and explained that this was the start. A small project that, if I dedicated myself, could make enough money to get me out of the hole. Nothing glamorous, nothing easy, but real. And for the first time in a long while, something felt real. I left that cafe with a notebook full of notes, a to-do list, and my heart racing. I couldn't tell if I was excited or terrified. On the bus ride home, I kept replaying his words. This isn't charity. Arthur didn't seem like the kind of man who did things without a reason. He wanted to see if I could prove myself. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and went through everything carefully. What was there? Wasn't just a job. It was a door. And I knew that if I stepped through it, there'd be no going back to the life I'd had before. That night, while I was making dinner, Arthur called me. Start tomorrow. And remember, if you want to get back on your feet, you can't be afraid to get your hands dirty. That's when I realized what he had to offer wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test. And I had no idea how much it was about to change my life. The next day, the alarm didn't even go off. I was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with Arthur's folder in my lap. My kids were still sleeping, and for a few minutes I just looked at them, feeling the weight of responsibility press against my chest. If this went wrong, there was no plan B, but if it worked, maybe, just maybe, I could give them back a little of the security they'd lost. The address he sent me this time led to a simple but well-organized warehouse. Inside, there were boxes, tools, and a small office in the back. Arthur was standing, talking to a younger man who gave me a shy nod. This is Ben. He'll show you what needs to be done, Arthur said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world for me to be there. The work was physical, nothing glamorous: sorting merchandise, organizing inventory, labeling products. I couldn't remember the last time I'd carried anything heavier than a grocery bag. But there was no room for delicacy here. Ben showed me the pace, and within minutes, my hands were dirty and my muscles were complaining. At first, I felt out of place. The plain clothes, the industrial setting, the feeling of starting from scratch, all of it reminded me how far I'd fallen, but each box stacked and each task completed felt like a small victory. Arthur didn't stay all day, but before leaving he looked at me and said, "Work like this is your business." I went home exhausted, sore in places I'd forgotten existed. But there was something different about that night. A good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes when you know you've done something that matters. My kids noticed my smile. "Mom, are you happy?" Lily asked, and I just nodded, unable to explain. In the days that followed, a routine set in. Wake up early, drop the kids at school, work at the warehouse, learn from Ben, write everything down. I noticed Arthur didn't treat me like someone who needed help, but like someone who needed to prove she could do it. Then one afternoon, he showed up unexpectedly. "I want to show you something," he said, leading me to a locked room at the back of the warehouse. When he opened the door, what I saw made my heart race, and I realized he had much bigger plans for me than I'd imagined. Inside the room, there was a large table covered with spreadsheets, catalogs, and a laptop open to a sales report. There was also a stack of envelopes with handwritten notes and sealed boxes with colorful labels. Arthur closed the door behind us and leaned against the table, arms crossed. "All of this," he began, "is a project that's been on hold. I invested in it, but I never found the right person to run it. I think you might be that person." My heart sped up. He talked about suppliers, potential clients, and profit margins like he was offering me a treasure map. I could barely keep up with all the details, but the idea of having something of my own, even if it started small, rekindled something I thought I'd lost forever. "It's not simple," he warned, "but I've seen you work. You can handle the pace. And more importantly, you've got a reason." I looked at him and knew he was talking about my kids. Arthur seemed to see exactly where my strength came from. I spent the whole afternoon there taking notes, asking about each step, trying to absorb everything. When I left, I felt both the weight and the lightness of it. Weight from the responsibility, lightness from finally having a path. That night, I sat at the table with my kids and for the first time in a long time, shared something that made me excited. I didn't go into details. I didn't want to create expectations too soon, but I told them things could get better. Ethan hugged me tightly and said, "I knew you'd figure it out, Mom. In the days that followed, Arthur taught me how to negotiate with suppliers, understand deadlines, and calculate prices. Sometimes the nerves almost paralyzed me, but he always said, "Mistakes happen. Just don't stop trying." Then one morning, he placed an envelope in front of me. Inside was a contract with my name and the title, Operations Manager. Proposal. If you can hit the target in there within 6 months, the partnership is yours. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, but I knew one thing. My life would never be the same. I signed the contract with slightly trembling hands, feeling the weight and promise of that paper. It was more than a job. It was the chance to rebuild everything I'd lost. Arthur handed me a copy and simply said, "Now it's up to you." There was no easy manual, no safety net, just hard work and the expectation that I'd rise to the challenge. In my first days as manager, I realized the challenge was much bigger than I'd imagined. I had to deal with tight deadlines, demanding clients, and unexpected problems hitting like waves in rough seas. Still, every obstacle I overcame felt like a shot of confidence. I was learning fast, maybe faster than I believed I could. Ben stayed by my side, patient, explaining technical details and helping me understand the pace of the business. We started to make a good team, and I could tell he was rooting for me. At times, it even felt like the whole warehouse was cheering for my progress. But behind the excitement, there was still fear. The contract had a clear clause. If I didn't hit the goal, it was over. At night, lying in bed, I thought about my kids and felt that knot in my chest. It wasn't just about me. It was about not letting them go through the same hardships again. Even tired, I started working extra hours at home. I used the kitchen as an improvised office, surrounded by notes, catalogs, and mugs of cold coffee. Lily would sometimes sit next to me to draw while I typed, and Ethan would ask to see what you're building. In those moments, I remembered exactly why I was fighting. Arthur would show up from time to time, watching from a distance, asking few questions. Always with that look that seemed to measure not just my performance, but my determination. I knew he wouldn't hand me anything on a silver platter. And then one afternoon, I got a call from a potential big client interested in placing an order that could account for more than half my target. My heart raced. I knew that if I could close that deal, I'd be a huge step closer to my goal. But I also knew one mistake could ruin everything. The call sounded promising, but I quickly realized I was dealing with someone tough to negotiate with. The client, the owner of a retail chain, spoke fast and demanded impossible prices, short deadlines, and guarantees I couldn't give. Every word felt like a test, and I was sweating, trying to keep my voice steady. He set an in-person meeting for the next day, and I hung up feeling like I was about to step into an arena. That night, the rain poured hard and the wind rattled the windows. I stayed in the kitchen late, going over my presentation, studying every detail of the products and numbers. But the more I prepared, the more I remembered the times I'd been called a failure. The shadow of my past crept into my confidence, like it was waiting for the slightest slip to take me down. The morning of the meeting, the car wouldn't start. I tried several times, but the battery was dead. I called for a cab, but the city was a mess with traffic and the rain. Time was flying. I ran to the bus stop, my heels sinking into puddles, clothes clinging to my skin. I reached the building with minutes to spare, soaked, and had to wipe my face with a tissue before going in. The client greeted me with an impatient look. I started talking, but he kept cutting me off, pointing out flaws, demanding quick answers. Each interruption knocked the wind out of me. And in a moment of nervousness, I dropped part of my folder on the floor. My face burned with embarrassment, but I forced myself to keep going. When I finally finished, he stayed silent for what felt like forever. Then he said he needed to think about it. No promises, no smile. Just a cold nod before walking me to the door. I left with the sinking feeling that everything might have just gone down the drain. Back at the warehouse, Arthur could tell from my face something had gone wrong. I didn't say a word, just set the papers on the table and stared at them, feeling a huge weight on my shoulders. "Not every battle is won on the field," he said calmly. "Some are fought in the mind of the one who refuses to give up." But in that moment, I wasn't sure I had the strength to wait. With every hour that passed without a response, my hope crumbled a little more. Until 2 days later, the phone rang, and his voice came through, carrying something I hadn't expected to hear. "Can we talk?" he said. his tone less cold than the first time. My heart sped up, but I kept my voice neutral and said yes. We set it for that same afternoon. I spent the next few hours wound tight, caught between the fear of hearing a no and the hope for a turnaround. When I walked into his office, I was more prepared and more determined than ever. He greeted me with a folder in hand and explained that he'd reviewed everything. "You don't have the structure I was hoping for, but you've got something most people don't. Grit," he said. That caught me off guard. And for a second, my throat tightened. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, he added, "However, to close with you, I need a big discount and faster delivery than you promised. If you can't do it, the deal dies here." It was an almost impossible challenge. The discount would eat up my margin, and the deadline meant sleepless nights at the warehouse. I went back to talk to Arthur, expecting him to tell me to refuse, but he just raised an eyebrow and said, "Then make it happen. Or do you think partnerships are built on easy orders?" I left with a heavy weight on my shoulders, knowing I'd have to convince suppliers, reorganize everything, and maybe even work alone on assembly. The next few days were a marathon. I negotiated with suppliers until I lost my voice, found ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality, and spent nights packing and labeling by myself. Ben tried to help, but he had his own deadlines, and I couldn't rely solely on him. My body started to protest. My back ached. My eyes burned. And the fear of failing made me swallow my tears so I wouldn't worry the kids. But every time I saw Lily and Ethan sleeping, I remembered it was for them. I couldn't go back to square one. The night before delivery, it poured relentlessly. The truck scheduled to pick up the goods got stuck in a flood. The client wouldn't accept delays. And that night, I realized that if I couldn't find a solution within hours, all my effort would be destroyed, along with the only chance I had to change my life. I grabbed my phone and called every contact I had. No one answered, or they said they couldn't help because of the storm. Every sorry I heard tightened my chest. The clock seemed to mock me, ticking away time I didn't have. Arthur showed up at the warehouse, assessed the situation in silence, and simply said, "You've got 3 hours. Show me what you're made of." I didn't know if that was encouragement or a cruel test, but there was no time to think. I grabbed my phone and messaged neighbors, acquaintances, even a delivery driver who'd saved me before with a small job. One replied, he had an old pickup truck, but could only take part of the load at a time. I said yes, without hesitation. I spent the next hour hauling boxes through the rain, clothes soaked, arms aching, hands slipping. Ben showed up in the middle of the chaos and, without a word, started helping. Every trip was a test of patience and endurance. The client called every 30 minutes asking where the goods were, and I answered in the steadiest voice I could, hiding my panic. On the final trip, with time running out, one of the packages tore open and part of the merchandise fell into dirty street water. For a moment, I froze. It felt like watching my effort shatter. Ben ran over, scooped everything up, and improvised packaging with tarp and duct tape. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. We arrived at the client's warehouse with 10 minutes to spare. He inspected each box, opened a few, and all I could hear was my heartbeat in my ears. When he finally signed the receipt, my whole body seemed to collapse. I was so exhausted I could barely thank him. On the way back, Arthur called me. "Congratulations. Now you know what it means to be in charge of something, but don't get comfortable. The next challenge will be bigger." I hung up looking out the car window, my hands still trembling. I'd managed to pull off the impossible, but I knew I was only standing on the edge of something much bigger. And deep down, I feared the next obstacle would be big enough to break me. The following weeks were a whirlwind that seemed endless. While I tried to organize deliveries for the client I'd just saved, bad news hit me like a punch to the stomach. Ben had received a job offer in another city and had to decide quickly. He was my only steady support in that storm, the quiet anchor that kept me from sinking. The thought of losing him terrified me. On top of that, problems started cropping up with one of the suppliers. A minor delay, but enough to damage the client's trust and the credibility I was fighting so hard to build. Each phone call fueled my anxiety, mixed with a restrained anger at everything and everyone that seemed to want me to fail. One especially cold night, alone in the small apartment I could barely afford, I got a message from Arthur. "Meeting tomorrow. I want to talk about expansion." My body froze. Expansion. It felt so far from my reality, but something in his tone told me this wouldn't be a gift. It would be an even harsher test. The next day, he hit me with an almost impossible challenge. I had to open a new distribution point in less than a month with zero experience, limited resources, and a team I didn't even know yet. Either you do it or the contract ends. The threat was clear, and so was my desperation. But this time, my hunger to win spoke louder. I gathered what little I had and started looking for people willing to work with me, even without guaranteed pay. Every conversation was a battle. Every skeptical look, a cruel reminder of my lack of credibility. When I thought things couldn't get worse, my phone rang. It was Ben. "I've decided to stay. We'll get through this together." It was the best news I'd had in weeks, but also a painful reminder of just how dire things were. Without him, I wouldn't have stood a chance. The journey to set up that new location was a mix of sleepless nights, hidden tears, and small miracles I hadn't expected. And in the middle of it all, an anonymous letter arrived at my address, full of veiled threats that made it clear someone wanted me out, no matter the cost. The letter was a shock that took my breath away. The aggressive words and menacing tone echoed something far bigger than simple resentment. It was a clear warning. My fight was attracting powerful enemies. Fear gripped my chest, but a spark of anger ignited too. I couldn't let them take me down, not after everything I'd been through. I tucked the letter into an envelope and hid it deep in my desk drawer, determined not to let it paralyze me. Ben noticed my unease, but I just told him I was tired and needed to focus on work. After all, opening the new location was the priority, my only real shot at turning this story around. Opening day came with a cruel mix of anxiety and hope. The store was ready, stock lined up, the team trained, at least in theory. Deep down, I knew there was still a long road ahead, but this was my chance to prove I could handle it. The pressure, though, was unbearable. Technical problems started right away. The system crashed. Some products arrived damaged, and the main client made a surprise visit. His criticism was harsh, and he made it clear any mistake would be fatal to the partnership. Meanwhile, the threatening letter hung over my mind like a dark cloud. I started looking at everyone with suspicion. Who would want me gone badly enough to use threats? The paranoia began eating away at my focus, making every decision harder. Ben tried to calm me down, but the tension between us grew. Fear and pressure started creating cracks in our partnership, and what had once been teamwork became a silent battle to keep hope alive. I needed to find the strength to hold it all together, even when it felt like everything was about to fall apart. At the end of that exhausting day, sitting alone in the office, I got a mysterious call. A distorted voice on the other end promised this was just the first of many lessons I'd have to learn. My body went cold. I didn't know what to expect. But one thing was certain. The fight I thought I was winning was far from over. That voice still echoed in my head, a shadow I couldn't see but could feel. But I couldn't give in to fear. Not now. The store's opening was just the beginning. I needed to fight back to show I wouldn't go down easily. That's when Arthur appeared. At the exact moment, he felt like my last hope. He wasn't just a stranger with a declined card. He was someone who saw the fight in my eyes and chose not to turn away. With a faint smile, he offered help that seemed far too simple to be real. But in that moment, accepting help was an act of courage greater than anything else. Arthur introduced me to contacts I never could have reached on my own. Suppliers who trusted him. Investors who respected his name. Slowly, he began guiding me into a world that felt miles away from my reality of overdue bills and sleepless nights. I was exhausted, of course, but starving for this chance at change. Every phone call Arthur made, every meeting he set up was like a beam of light cutting through the darkness I'd been drowning in. I had to hold on to it even with the fear of failing again. But his help didn't come free of charge. Arthur was a complex man with his own secrets, and I could feel he expected something in return. It unsettled me, but deep down I knew I couldn't question fate when the door I'd been waiting for was finally opening. With his support, I managed to renegotiate debts, organize inventory, and plan campaigns to attract customers. It was hard work, but for the first time, victory felt close. Still, the voice from that call kept pounding in my head, a constant reminder I wasn't safe. And just when I thought I could finally breathe, I got a message that changed everything again. A revelation that would test my trust and prove that in life's game, no one is what they seem. The message hit me like a punch to the gut. Arthur needed me to make a decision that could jeopardize everything I'd been fighting for. At first, I thought it was a test, a way to measure my courage. But the truth was far more complicated and painful. He asked me to act on his behalf, to use my name to close a risky deal, something I never would have imagined doing on my own. My trust in him was hanging by a thread, and that proposal shook my safety line. The fear of messing up, of losing everything, was crushing. I was torn, grateful for his help, yet terrified of becoming complicit in something I barely understood. Arthur said he trusted me, that it was the only way to save the store and the future I was trying to build. What felt like a trap to me, he saw as an opportunity. Nights passed without sleep, my thoughts spinning like a tornado. I couldn't run from the responsibility, but the weight of the decision crushed me. I wondered if I was betraying myself, if his help came with a price I couldn't afford to pay, but deep down, I knew there was no turning back. I took the challenge even with my heart in pieces. From that moment on, my life took a turn I never could have predicted. Through mistakes, wins and twists, the battle to get back everything stolen from me would only grow more intense. Arthur stayed by my side with that enigmatic smile as if he knew secrets I wasn't ready to hear. And I, increasingly trapped in this dangerous game, had to find the strength to win, not just for me, but for the life that was finally starting to rise from the ashes. The weight of my decision hit faster than I could have imagined. The very next day, as I tried to focus on the store, I got a call that froze my blood. An unexpected problem had come up in the deal Arthur had asked me to handle. It wasn't a simple mistake. It was something that threatened everything I'd been building. My heart pounded, my palms slick with sweat. The voice on the other end was firm, but carried an urgency I couldn't ignore. We had to act fast, and I was at the center of the storm, unsure which way to turn. Arthur showed up just then, calm and determined, guiding me toward the best way out, but I could tell he carried a burden too, something he wasn't telling me, a shadow hanging over him that was now starting to spill into my life in dangerous ways. I clung to him because despite the fear, he was my only anchor. But doubt began to creep in. How far could I really trust him? Was I actually on the right path, or was it all an illusion about to collapse? As the problems piled up, one thing became clear. I'd have to fight not only the world outside, but also the ghosts rising within my own story. The pressure in my chest wasn't just from what was happening at the store. It was from everything still hidden. Arthur began to open up little by little, revealing pieces of his past he'd never shared, secrets that explained the shadow he carried, and why he was so invested in helping me, even when it seemed like he was risking too much. But the more I understood, the more I questioned if I was ready to step into this world of uncertainty and risk. The decisions I was making were no longer mine alone, and the price of trust could be far too high. I felt like I was in a bigger game than I'd realized, and each wrong step could send me into an abyss I might never climb out of. Hope wrestled with fear, and I had to decide which one I'd give power to. A life of fight and growth, or the despair that wanted to consume me. That night, alone at home, my mind wouldn't stop. Arthur's words echoed, and the future felt like a puzzle I still had to piece together with no guarantee it would all work out. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Quitting had never been an option. The truth about who was behind the threats devastated me. And it was someone I never would have imagined. Ben, yes. The man who had been by my side from the start, who promised to be my support, was actually playing a very dirty game. The letter, the mysterious calls, the lessons I was supposed to learn, it was all him. When Arthur told me what he'd found, the shock was so deep, my body seemed to lock up. He'd managed to dig through conversations, messages, even old contacts, and put together pieces I'd never have seen through my blind trust. Ben had been pushing me to give up, to hand over control of the store, to accept some shady proposal that would only benefit him. The threatening letter was just the start of a series of attempts to force me to let go of my dream. The sting of betrayal burned like fire inside me. How could someone I loved and trusted want to destroy me? The memories of moments when he seemed like my safe harbor now hit me with a bitterness I couldn't measure. I felt so vulnerable, yet more determined than ever. This battle wasn't just against a competitor, the market, or poverty. It was against the man who swore to stand by me, but chose to become my worst enemy. Arthur stayed by my side, steady as always, promising me this fight wouldn't be mine alone. He offered me a plan to protect the store, confront Ben, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. But the feeling that I was surrounded by enemies, that even those who claimed to love me could stab me in the back, made me stronger because I knew I could never be a victim again. In that moment, caught between despair and anger, I began to see a way out, a hard road full of risks, but one that could lead me to the freedom I'd been searching for. And there, in the silence of my office, as the clock ticked away, I made the decision that would change everything, even if it came at a high price. The decision to face Ben was like lighting a flame in the darkness surrounding me. I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore, nor could I quietly accept his dirty game. Arthur helped me craft a careful strategy, knowing this showdown wouldn't be easy. Ben had power, influence, and knew all the shortcuts to take me down. We started gathering evidence, messages, documents, anything that showed his true intentions. Every word I'd saved, every suspicious conversation became ammunition. The feeling of finally taking action gave me a bit of strength. Even with the constant fear that he might retaliate in an even worse way, Ben didn't waste time. When he realized I wouldn't back down, he became even more aggressive. Veiled threats, attempts to damage my reputation, even whispering rumors to business partners. The pressure grew. And once again, I felt the weight of isolation. But, unlike before, I wasn't defenseless anymore. Arthur became more than an ally. He became my right hand. He contacted lawyers, took steps to protect the store, and advised me to document everything. I could feel the battle was far from over, but I also knew I was on the right path to take my power back. Meanwhile, the people around me began to notice something big was happening. Some who had once doubted me started looking at me with respect, while others, those who were only around for their own gain, vanished. The truth had a price, and I was paying it. Every night was a fight against fear, against insecurity, but it was also a night of learning, of discovering a strength I didn't even know I had. The dream of the store, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, was being rebuilt, brick by brick. Still, something gnawed at me. Ben wasn't just an enemy. He was the man I had shared moments, plans, and even dreams with, understanding that betrayal hurt more than anything, and showed me just how big the battle I had to win truly was. But I knew I would win for me, for my life, for the future I wanted to build, and I was ready for anything. After months of fighting, the air around me began to change. The shadows Ben had tried to cast over me lost their power, and the truth finally came to light for everyone to see. With the evidence in hand, the lawyer filed the case, and justice began to work in my favor. It was a victory I never imagined possible, considering everything I'd been through. My store, which had been on the verge of closing so many times, not only survived, but began to thrive. New customers arrived. Solid partnerships formed. And I regained the confidence I thought I'd lost forever. Every small step forward felt like a massive victory for someone who, just months earlier, had been living in fear and doubt. Arthur was with me every step of the way. He wasn't just the man who showed up in that supermarket. He became my support, my inspiration. That simple act of kindness at the checkout line was the turning point in my life, and I never forgot it. What began as a small gesture became the foundation for everything I built afterward. And I became stronger than ever, not just financially, but emotionally. The scars of betrayal and fear didn't disappear, but they stopped paralyzing me. I used each one as fuel for my transformation. Today, I'm a confident, independent, happy businesswoman. Ben, who tried to destroy me, is now on the other side of the story. Justice proved that no one is above it, and that the real battles are won through courage, not manipulation. I didn't just survive. I rose from the ashes. My past, with all its pain and humiliation, became the foundation of my strength. And this is the story I tell to remind myself and anyone who wants to listen that even in the worst moments, life can surprise you. That kindness can be a powerful weapon, and that we must never stop fighting for our dreams. If I could tell you one thing, it would be this: the sweetest revenge is living well, standing back up even when everything seems lost. Today, when I look at my life, I barely recognize that woman lost in the supermarket. I live in a big house, full of light and laughter, a true home where every corner tells a story of resilience. The garden is vibrant, full of flowers I planted myself, a symbol of how much I've grown and bloomed after so much suffering. My business has flourished beyond anything I could have imagined, and I finally feel in control of my own destiny. Financial stability has brought me peace, but what truly transforms is the happiness I've found in the details of my daily life. Waking up without fear, without anxiety, is a gift I've learned to treasure. I married a very kind man who respects me, supports me, and makes me laugh every day. Our love is light, full of shared dreams and plans for an even brighter future. He came into my life when I had already learned to love and value myself. Arthur will always have a special place in my heart. He was the unexpected angel who lit the spark of hope when I thought everything was lost. Looking back makes me grateful for every fall, every tear, because they brought me here stronger, wiser, and finally happy. The sweetest revenge was proving to myself that I could overcome anything and reinvent myself. And you? What did you think of this emotional story? Like this video and comment with your city. I'd love to know. Oh, and don't forget to watch the video on the left. There's much more coming your way. See you soon.